a little bit about how to transition from youth group work into this, the traditional youth group model, into this kind of enterprise. So the main oppositions that you experienced when trying to
Yeah.
initiate something like this, and also startup costs and how to get that off the ground. You mentioned a $10,000 investment of your own money. So we'll start with those two.
Yeah. So, okay, let's start. Like, I did I think there's some, for somebody actually on this call, I did a series of videos on innovation. And one of the things I said that the most important thing is you start out thinking about how to do something like differently is I say, consider your soil conditions. And by that, I mean, both the context that you're in terms of a church. Do you know yourself well enough to know what your strengths and your weaknesses are? Have you done enough self-exploration to know what your strengths and interests are, to know whether you can actually pull an idea that you have off? So it's really important. In terms of like church stuff, there's a lot of churches that this would not have worked at. And there's a lot of assets that I have at my disposal in terms of a church. Like, my church is a traditional church, but at some point it acquired like this little mini market supermarket that was next to its property and turned that into the church offices. Well, the back 20% of that was storage. And I just convinced the church, like, what if we cleared that storage out and made it more efficient? We could put a weight room in there. And there's this guy out in the community who wants to do that. And he's got a year of theology seminary under his belt in the past. Like, why wouldn't we do that? And my church, because it's like traditional in a lot of ways, really a lot of ways is very vanilla. Like, if you were looking for a flashy church, you would not come to our church. Like, but it has a capacity to trust its leadership. It has a capacity to put up with a certain amount of experimenting for the sake of the glory of God. Like, it's willing to do that. And so I'm very aware that you might have the world's greatest idea, and it might be not the right time or the right place for you to launch that idea. In fact, there was a guy that reached out to me from Texas some weeks ago. He wanted to start landscaping. This was just before COVID. And when I talked to him, I said, well, like, tell me about yourself. What are you into? Well, I learned that he was like a double black belt in like Taekwondo or something, and had been a part of like a series of like franchise Taekwondo businesses. Like, he'd been there from the ground up. And then he's like, oh yeah, my church has this empty space out back on like an acre. And I was like, well, why the heck would you want to do landscaping? Like, why on earth would you punish yourself with landscaping? Because let me tell you, it's not fun. And I'm like, why wouldn't you just start like a dojo and build your faith into that? And so, a lot of times it's figuring out, in his church, unfortunately, his church they couldn't get their imagination around to seeing how those things came together. Indeed, a friend of mine came and visited me, and I asked him why he wanted to come and see what we were doing, and anyways, I'll spare you the details, but he came and said, the reason I want to come and see why or how you did this is why your church didn't fire you for coming in the room. And there's some reasons why I think that didn't happen. Part of it was my church's personality. Part of it was I built trust by doing the main job well for 4 years before they were going to trust me with enough dice to roll across the table. Trust is a huge part of this. I also am an ordained minister. And I'm a dude. And that probably gives me a certain amount of privilege within the system that other people wouldn't have in theirs. So there's all these dynamics of power and opportunity that are in there that you really do have to, as Jesus would say, you have to count the cost. You've got to think about, man, am I going to want to landscape at year 3? Or I don't know, you could do a jewelry business or an ice cream cart or a food truck or where. Like, you got to count the cost of what carrying that thing around at year 3 is going to feel like, and then think about where they're going to allow you to kind of do it. So there's a whole bunch of things to weigh out and discern prayerfully before you go launching in.